Let's move on. Today we're going to be talking about emergencies and direction finding. Chula is going to be presenting, so questions please to either Andrew or me on the group chat, and we'll raise them at the appropriate point. Chula, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Good evening, everyone. Let me just get out the slides. Great. So as Paul said, emergencies, VHF, direction finding or VDF, and also I'll just squeeze in something about London information. In the context of the emergencies, the thing I'd like to say first is this whole conversation, indeed the whole training, the slides, the videos, the coaching, is about RT, and it's all in the context of fly the aeroplane first, hence the aviate first on the slide. So if you've got time and capacity left to be getting out the Mayday call, which might be very important, granted, then do that. But if the airspeed's extreme at one end or the other and is diverging from what it should be, then best fix that first. If you're still wondering if it's that field you're going to crash into or that field, then strongly suggest that you focus on the flying and then come back to flying and the procedures, I might say, and then come back to the RT call. It's not that it isn't important. It's not that it isn't important to do as soon as you practically can, but we certainly don't want to be talking as we spin into the ground. Okay, so that covers it. That applies to everything we're going to say now. So what I'm going to do then is, in the next sort of 35 minutes or so, with the help of Dave Fiddler, who's a bit of a veteran of D&D, thank you, Dave, I see you online, and Paul, they're going to make some contributions, but this is the core of it. And of course, not particularly, and indeed hardly ever repeating anything that's in the materials that you've already worked through. So is it a Mayday or a PAN? That debate, that question, we'll look at that briefly. I'll say briefly because at the end of the day, it's of secondary importance. So there's the spoiler alert. Secondly, something about the distress and diversion cell down at Sonic D&D. And that's who you speak to if you speak to on 121.5. We will talk about how you can practice with D&D, practice and train with them. And that's that's a link to training fixes in particular. Once that's done, we'll talk briefly about VHF direction finding. There's one slide on London information, squeezed into this part 5, really on the basis that it's a national frequency, a bit like the D&D frequency. And then we'll go to coaching as normal. And unless something has changed, and Paul will chip in if it has, we will not reconvene at the end. So once we go off to breakout rooms, that's the session closed. Okay, so remember, there are 2 states, distress and urgency, 2 states. And we announce them with these code words, Mayday and Pan. And we announce a condition of distress with Mayday said 3 times. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. And so what is a Mayday? Well, if that's you, if that's somebody else, if it's you, it's a bit late. If that's going to be you in a few seconds, then it's a Mayday, pretty obviously. If it's somebody else, and there's a debate whether a Mayday is for somebody else or not, we're of the view that it is. So if you see somebody else in and who needs assistance, and the key words here from CAT 413, as far as I'm concerned, are distress, obviously, it's a strong word, threat, it's serious, danger, and it's imminent, then it's a Mayday. Don't spend too much time really thinking about it. And Paul, I know you've, I think, witnessed one being handled well. Do you want to chip in now?
Yeah, so this is when I was flying in the Club Class Nationals with G. Dale, who's got a wonderful lecture on what it feels like to be at the wrong end of this. and I was about 2 kilometers out from a cloud of gliders. It was a low blue day somewhere near Newmarket heading in, and all of a sudden what I saw was a glider spinning down through the gaggle, and then fortunately a few seconds later a parachute. Now somewhere near that was Sarah Kellman in her glider, and she's an EasyJet pilot, and she did a really smart thing, which was she flipped from the gliding channel that she was on to, as it happened, Cambridge approach, which I guess she had in her standby, and made a mayday call. And that gave the guys then on the ground the local air ambulance helicopter within a fairly short period of time. So good bit of thinking, mayday call out on a channel with somebody who could do something about it, and it led to a helpful result. So that's all I want to say, Sheila.
Thanks, Paul. So that cues me up really, or tees me up to say a couple of things, which is normally if you're on a frequency to someone who can help, so an air traffic control unit, then make your mayday or pan call on that frequency and only go to the 121.5 if you're not on a frequency. That's probably, well, that is the advice in Cat 413, as you probably all know. And the other point is made by Andrew through the week to me on the phone. I think it's a really good point, and it might sound really basic, but if you've been in anything like this at all, then speaking for myself, my brain gets smaller the minute I get in an aeroplane, and when it starts to go wrong, it gets really small. So don't forget to tune the radio, switch it on, because it may not be on in the context of a glider, tune it, make sure the volume's up. And if you're on a gliding frequency, cross-country frequency or something, don't forget to switch to turn to 121.5. Okay. So that's all I was going to say about mayday. Urgency calls then, pan, 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 pan. So this might be, and this is BGA advice, if you're lost and you think you might be in controlled airspace, they say go to 121.5, which obviously right, because the BGA say it. Myself, if I knew I was in Birmingham's airspace and I could find the frequency off the chart, then I'd go to Birmingham. But that's a pan call. Another example that occurs to me would be, because I nearly made a pan call in this context, somewhere over Isham, and I don't know why, but I just started to feel more and more unwell and was thinking of diverting into Gloucester. And I was pretty much on the point of making a pan call to Gloucester and saying that I'm not well. You might say we don't need to, but it does mean that you get the airspace, you get the controller's attention, and it kind of alerts them that you are stressed. And if you're an amateur, again, like me, then if I'm stressed, I'm probably making mistakes. So it's worth saying so. And actually, one of the things that came up in coaching, I've heard it several times in the context of gliding, and it came up in coaching 2 days ago, is this. I was in my coaching group, and someone said, well, it's a motor glider. It's not really a mayday. What do you think? Well, I understand that. My point of view is this, that the rest of the world would regard a failure of an engine in a single engine aeroplane as a mayday. So even if you think you're completely capable of managing this and it's an everyday event for you to manage your motor glider into a field, fine. But I would say don't risk confusion. You didn't start the flight thinking your engine was going to fail and you're going to be in this field. I would call that a mayday. You don't have to pay for it. So the engine's failed, for me, it's going to be a mayday. All right, so that's that. So is it a mayday or a pan? Well, hopefully I've given you some sort of thoughts there. Now, having said that, frankly, nobody cares. It's all, more professionally, it's of secondary importance. Do not waste a nanosecond thinking, is it a mayday or is it a pan? Just make your reasonable best judgment and announce it with one or the other of those two prefixes. Secondary importance. Just pre the call, somebody asked, is it in the test, is it important to get the whole format exactly right? Answer, yes. Notice this, yeah, the answer is yes. Now, Now, having said that, if this happens to you in real life, I'm damn sure I will not be going through all 8 points or whatever it is in Cat 413. I might think I could do it sitting here, and maybe I can, maybe I can't. I'm sure I can't if it's a real emergency. And it would be nuts to be giving yourself this memory test when things are a distress situation. So confine yourself to that which is important. Mayday, saying those words is important. Call sign type, well, you can see what I've written. This is what I think would generally fit the bill. Call sign and type the nature of the emergency, so what's gone wrong, engine failure, and what you intend doing about it. I intend landing in a field 2 miles south of Toddington. Position and level, currently 3 miles south of Toddington, descending through 2,000 feet. That's probably all you need. So in this course, by all means, indeed, frankly, as an examiner, I'd encourage you to aim for perfection. By all means, do the full format. And when we come to practice in 20 minutes or so, by all means, have a go at the full format. But equally, if you want to use the practice and have that aligned with what you think you'll do in reality, i.e. a pragmatic, shortened version, then that's fine too. That's your choice. Couple of other points then to make. If you hear an emergency call, it's really important that you don't start talking and trying to be helpful. Keep quiet. Note the details. Okay, so it might be that somebody didn't hear everything. So note the details. I'd say pick up a pen. Having been in a glider many years ago, is pretty inexperienced, I will say that for myself, and someone made a very panicky Mayday call. My goodness, it got my heart racing. It was actually very difficult to concentrate. So do your best to listen, write down what it is that's key. Location is probably the most important thing. And of course, relay if necessary. So if it's not answered, wait to see if the call is going to be answered, if it's on a proper air traffic control frequency. If it's not answered, then do a relay, Mayday relay. Stay on scene is the next bullet point. So if you have the capacity, the personal capability and the airplane capability to stay on scene and help and guide rescue services and say there's someone behind that hedge or that's where it is, behind in the middle of that copse, then great. It's morally and legally the right thing to do is to stay on scene. But don't stay there if you're going to be in the way of search and rescue. Don't stay there if it's going to take up so much of your capacity, you're going to be the next crash. And that is, I have a personal experience of that too from the roads. I had a crash age 17. Friend drove out to get me, parked his car, discovered it was by the other person's car, drove off. He walked back because he'd crashed. So it's an upsetting thing. So only stay on the scene if you really are genuinely capable. And finally on this page, then respect the message priority rule. So this list is in Cat 413, and it's really there as a reminder because it's an important list. And just to say that, of course, distress trumps urgency, which trumps direction finding, and so forth. So if you've got a pan call and there's a Mayday underway, then obviously you're going to have to go to another frequency or wait. Good. So let's say you come to distress and diversion cell on 121.5. So 121.5 is an international frequency. There's a UHF frequency too, but I think we need only concern ourselves with this VHF frequency 121.5. International frequency, but what isn't international and maybe unique to the UK as far as I know, is that it is monitored by a set of professionals from the Air Force whose job it is to help aircraft in distress. Okay, and they will give you, I'll make brief allusion to it, and Dave Fiddler's going to make more allusion to it in a minute. They will give you fantastic assistance and will coordinate everything that you need to happen that wouldn't normally happen, they'll do for you. And most wonderful of all is there's something called auto triangulation. So if you talk on 121.5, then three lines come together on that. If you were looking at the last slide carefully, the slide will be up again in a minute. There's a screen in front of the controller by his or her desk, and there's a big screen in front of them as well. Three lines come together, and you, the person talking on 1215, is in the middle of those three lines. So as long as you're above 2,000 feet within 40 miles of the London TMA, then you're going to get a three-line trace. And you might need to be higher, more like 3,000 if you're further away. But that's the system. And frankly, a two-line trace wouldn't be bad because they're still going to know pretty much where you are. And they, of course, will share that information with you. So at that point, Dave Fiddler, ex-Phantom pilot and veteran of D&D, has a season ticket, is going to share, I'm very privileged, share some of his experience with D&D. Dave.
Good evening, Tudor, and thanks. Yes, I've had cause to use Mayday 5 times and PAN quite a number of other times as well. The first thing I would say is that D&D, and indeed all air traffickers, will give you a great service, providing you ask for the service that you require at the time. A point that I made last time, and I make again this time, is most air traffickers are really, really good if you call Mayday or PAN, and they will give you a superb service, but some can get a little pushy in asking questions, some being a very, very small percentage. You have a wonderful call called standby if they are pushing you too hard, and as Chula says, you have to fly an aeroplane first of all, or a glider. I would add to that also is if you are putting yourself at risk to make a call, don't make a call, get out if that's what you've got to do. In other words, your life comes before telling the world that you're about to lose control or have lost control. And there was one very good case given last time where an air trafficker heard just a Harrier pilot saying, "Mayday, mayday, mayday, oh bugger it, I'm ejecting," and he went. And that's the way you save your life, because that's what it's about. Now, I would put a slightly different distinction on Mayday PAN. Mayday, if you call Mayday, the gates of heaven open up to you. Everyone will look after you. They won't ask you for clearances into airspace. They just make it happen. And they will do everything in their power to give you the most assistance possible. If you call PAN, they will give you good assistance. However, you will be fitted in with other air traffic. The difference being is if you call Mayday, they will keep the runway open for you to land on. If you call PAN, they will only give you the runway when you get in that sort of range. Now, my last group on Tuesday morning, all being glider pilots, we all know how to land in field. I gave them emergency bits falling off it, and they said, "I'm going to land in a field." My reply to them, that's perfectly good, but personally, I would rather land on an airfield with an aircraft that is difficult to handle, because if I screw it up and plant myself on the ground and hurt myself, there are people there who can instantly get to me to help me. I'll give you an example of one, a beloved student. We've all had beloved students did to me. I was flying a Hawk, training people to be fast jet pilots. We'd been flying low level around Scotland when we deliberately made the student pull out of low level at the very last minute with the fuel to get up to 40,000 feet plus and fly high level back to Anglesey, some 200 miles away, and do a straight in approach and land there. We put the pressure on them. That's what we do in the services. It was a good student. We'd all gone well. We got up to 44,000 feet in the southern part of Scotland. It was a lovely gin clear day. We were going nicely, coming towards the Lake District, and all of a sudden the cockpit filled with acrid smoke. Now, our wonderful engineers have got great systems in these airplanes. They put a cold air unit in it that works very, very well, but they put a synthetic oil in it to service a very high spinning thing. And if it graunches and comes to a halt, the heat generates a poisonous smoke, and we all knew that. So the cockpit is now filled with this poisonous smoke, and the student in the front went into auto mode, and we've all heard them. Oh shit, smoke in the cockpit. I have to select 100%, roll the toggle down, and I'm sitting in the back shouting, stop, 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 no, don't do it. And at this stage, he grabs hold of the plunger and he dumps the cabin pressurization at 44,000 feet. Now that, if you've never had it done to you, is an experience I can't recommend. And the whole cockpit fills now with steam as well. You can't see where you're going. You're in big problems. You've got the bends coming on, you've got pressure breathing coming on, and if you don't get it right, you've only got about 45 seconds before it's going to kill you. That is a mayday, ladies and gentlemen. So I now have to call mayday because what he'd done to me, but also because I was above an airway and desperately needed to get down. As soon as I put the emergency squawk on, which I did first, the world opens up to you. The emergency squawk 7700 sets bells, whistles and clangers going on all over the country. D&D have alarms that sound off, and special air traffic units also alarm. There's 4 marks come on the screen next to your aircraft, and the bells go. So they knew there was an aircraft in that position in emergency. And as soon as I said, I need to crash dive now and get down, they just opened up the gates, cleared the airway traffic out of my way. I zoomed down to below 10,000 feet. And then they very nicely took me to Carlisle Airport and steered me all the way there. I never had to call for any clearances. All the frequencies were given to me, and it makes life very easy for you. So making the right call, and I would say if there are bits falling off your glider, you're in trouble, it's a mayday, and I would aim to get to an airfield because the gates will open. I think that's enough for me, Chula.
And
thanks, Dave. And it's 8 o'clock, so if anybody wants to go and talking of which, making lots of noise, go and do it. We'll take any questions, I guess, but we'll continue in a minute or two.
Thanks.
You've heard the story now, Chula.
No, I'm so pleased that you told us the story because we did. For those who are still on the channel, we didn't hear the whole story on Tuesday. So, yeah.
And the debrief, as you say, was one-sided on the ground.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Bloody hell.
I think he realised what he'd done as soon as he pulled the plug.
Well, yeah, smoke plus steam plus you shouting.
Nothing was going to get through to him. He was just in auto mode. Yeah. I didn't know that about the pressure breathing as well. This is where you have to exhale rather than here at sea level. We have to breathe in, don't you? Is this pressure breathing where you have to exhale? Is that the point? That's the point. It's pumped into you at very high pressure to get the oxygen across.
It's about an extra 2 psi, isn't it?
What PSI did you say there, Paul?
It's an extra 2 over ambient. I think.
It's much more than that.
No, I don't think so.
When you're up at 44, it's graduated depending on the height you're at. But if you're up at 50 grand stuff, you can hardly expel it.
Yeah. Okay, should we continue? Chula, over to you.
Great. Well, Dave, thank you very, very much.
Yes, Chula.
Genuinely fascinating. And can I highlight the slightly more mundane, because I'm still up 44,000 feet myself, picturing that. So don't hesitate to call. Is what I'm going to take from that. If you provide sensible, if you call Mayday, you really don't have to worry about anything else. Everyone else will look after everything else around you. So that's the point of the Mayday. So Dave, was that it? Was there anything else key?
No, I think I've given you everything there.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you so much. And I want to say, I've never been up at 44. I'm doing well. I'm up at 4,000 feet. I'm happy. But it does. The important point here is call early. So I'm not going to talk stories. How could I against that? But I will just say that you do not want to get what I had when I called D&D for my one and only time for real, and the controller said, oh, transmit for DF. So I did again, and he said, you're a single line trace. I've never had one of those before, like I care. And then he said, you could be anywhere on a 300 nautical mile line. Well, I was so low that I'm not going to tell you how low, and if you've done air law, you can work it out. I was so low, and there was rain everywhere around. I was hoping for something rather more reassuring than somewhere along the 300 nautical mile line. So, subject to the very first thing I said on this presentation, call early. Everything works better if you call early. One other thing to say of general, it's not D&D, but it's made or emergency call specific, which is if you change frequency, you can change your call sign to, if you were glider 123, you can become Mayday glider 123. So at your discretion or the controller's discretion, you can either of you can add the Mayday or PAN as a prefix to your call sign. And probably if you're changing frequency, that's probably a good thing to do. So they know it's you and they know your status straight away. Okay, picture of a glider in a field near Woburn, I think. So that's there to say this is optional. I personally do it, some glider pilots do, some don't, but I don't particularly want to waste the HEMS, helicopter people, air ambulance and all sorts of ground Treble 9 services coming to me in my field. I just want my trailer. So you may think it's a good idea to call D&D. There's their phone number. I have it in my phone under D&D, and tell them where you are. They'll ask you for your call sign, obviously your location, and when I did it last, they asked for the color of the aeroplane. So that's a thought for you. And before we leave D&D, let me just tell you that they have a very good leaflet. Paul, thank you for finding this up-to-date one for me. It's got 6 panels. There's the first 3. That leaflet can be accessed through the internet. The second piece of chat on today's Zoom call is a message from me. Starts, good evening, everyone. Here's the link to the D&D. The link to get this is there. So it's actually, there's no flannel in this leaflet. It's a very good leaflet full of really useful, interesting stuff. So I recommend that you just quickly find that at some point and copy it. Okay, so I think that's pretty much that. So let's just move on and say you can practice a PAN call, an urgency call. I'm not going to talk about it because if you want to practice anything, then I'm going to say the thing to do is to practice a training fix. It's kind of more useful and it's more likely to be relevant, especially in the gliding world. And if you want to know more about practice PAN, it's on the leaflet. So training fixes. Whether this is exactly right or not, I don't know, but I like to think it's this. Pilots are a bit shy to call up and say they're lost. So I think that they invented training fix. If you want to be a bit shy about it and you're a bit unsure where you are, you can practice, you can pretend you're training, or you can do it because you are training. If you say training fix, training fix, training fix, that gives the auto triangulation time to work. Call sign training fix. Wait, then pause, because they've got to go and put their coffee down, come and sit in that chair that you saw the picture of, and have a look to see where those 3 lines are coming together. And they will reply to you. My slides do it this way. Blue is pilot, red is ground. So they'll say, glider 123 London Centre, your position indicates 2 miles south of Milton Keynes. Do you require further assistance? If you do require further assistance and you are really a bit lost, then say a firm. Ask for a vector 2 somewhere, or say you'll stay on frequency till you recognize something. But if you don't require further assistance, then get off the frequency, because we don't want to be blocking the frequency unnecessarily, or talking inanely on it, because we don't, but also because, and it's worth knowing this, that aircraft with 2, 3 or 4 boxes, radios, will have their radios they're not in use tuned to 121.5. So even if you're really low, there'll be some EasyJet up high that will hear you. So it's worth knowing that that's happening, but it's also another indication to use it responsibly, so that, you know, at the end of this course, we don't really want 200 people all talking endlessly on 121.5, but it's worth knowing that lots of people are listening to you. So that's how you do a training fix, as per on that slide. If you are lost, just say you're lost. It really is a no-blame culture. That time when I was embarrassingly low and it was all my own fault, I can't tell you how good the service was, and I sent them a nice big check to the RFA service charity. It blew me away how fantastic they were, including a room in the officers' mess at the end of the day. So don't hesitate to call. Dave said it, and I'm going to keep saying it. And if you are lost, then just for goodness sake, say you're lost. It's a no-blame culture. Call early and own up. Because what you don't want to do is look out of your left window and see one of those or a typhoon next to you, because you've been intercepted. And that would not be a good feeling. Or in a glider, something maybe more like that. So apart from showing off some photos from the North Sea, or the picture before, is to say this point, that if you are intercepted, they'll be trying to talk to you on 121.5. So after the adrenaline subsided a little from your legs, tune the radio, turn the volume up and say hello, because they're going to have some words to you. And by the way, if you let it go this far, no promises about the no blame culture. Okay. So that was it on the two emergency states of distress and urgency, and D&D. And now we'll just look briefly at VHF direction finding. So firstly, a quick reminder of the concept, which is this, that if you talk on a frequency which is designated for this purpose, and therefore there is an associated bit of ground equipment, Cranfield has this equipment, for example, if you talk on that frequency, there's a piece of kit in the control tower which tells the air traffic controller the pilot's relative bearing. So just look at this picture. Oh, by the way, look at the words. So Cranfield approach. So notice this is just the initial message format. Their call sign, your request. So Cranfield approach, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta requests QDM. Direction magnetic, DM, direction magnetic. And when you do that talk to a suitably equipped control tower, then a bit of kit like this, I call it the VDF machine, there's probably a clever term for it, will display 120, because that is the direction to home to the control tower. The default setting is QDM, so we'll come to QTE very briefly in a second. So if you talk, your bearing to steer, assuming no wind, to the control tower is 120, and the controller will reply in these terms: Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, QDM, 120 degrees, class Bravo. So if you are lost, if that's why you're using it, you don't need to be lost, but if that's why you're using it, my strong advice even is to then turn to 120. And if you're a power pilot, Billy, or whoever, make sure your DI is aligned at this point. So you talk, they see 120, they tell you 120, it is a read back item. So you need to say QDM 120 degrees class Bravo, Golf Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta. Just very quickly, don't really want to get distracted on this, but I think for completeness, I'll say, if you want a true bearing, then it's a good tip, I think, to say true bearing, because that's not the default. Make that your first words. The controller, he or she's got nothing else to do, will switch it to true bearing, and then carry on and say Cranfield approach, Golf Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta requests true bearing. Okay. Its uses and availability. So it's not universally available. I'm told most military airfields do have this kit, and a number of civilian fields do too. You can tell if they do because it says, if you look at the slide now, look at the Cranfield slide, look at the bottom of the ATZ there, it says EGTC, then it says VDF 122.855. So that's the frequency. You talk on that frequency, they have that equipment and they can give you a QDM. So you can use it to orientate yourself, check your progression along a line. But also, I've had this happen, and it was Cranfield, and I was over Milton Keynes going towards Bedford, and they just out of the blue, I was taking a basic service from them, and they out of the blue said, Glider Sierra Hotel, transmit for DF. And what they were doing was they had someone on a missed approach, or was about to be on a missed approach, and they wanted to see where I was in relation to their extended centre line. So whether you never use it, lots of people would say this is old school and not really relevant, I get that, but it's worth knowing about. It is worth knowing about. So that's VDF. Okay, this is a standalone new paragraph, new chapter, one slide only to say this. It's another national frequency. Forgive me, I don't have a map for Scotland. If there's anyone on the channel that's got a map for Scotland that can give me that one, great. But otherwise, London information. The frequencies for London information are on the half-mil map, if you look carefully. And it's of more relevance to power pilots who might want to open and close a flight plan or get some weather that's not on Volmet, or maybe you're flying over some remote area where you can't get a LARS, Low Airspace Radar service. You might choose to get a service from London Information. It is a basic service only. It's really important. Don't be fooled because they give you a squawk, which they might well do. You should not assume that you're being watched on radar. It's a basic service only. Right. So just before we go to the group work, and that's just there to remind you what the group work is, you should have this piece of paper. Well, it's two pieces of paper. Page one tells you the context. You're flying Glider Golf Foxtrot, Motor Glider Golf Foxtrot Lima Kilo Sierra. You're going from Sywell to Cambridge, and then how the coaches want to work with this sheet is up to them. Each row of 7, I think it is a different exercise. So before we go to that, we'll do some questions. Andrew.
Chula, yes, we've got quite a few. Let's reading down from the top. There was a question about wanting to know more about the test, and I just said we're going to cover everything to do with the actual RT test, the FRTOL test, next week. Come back next week for more information on that. Brahim asked, do local controllers monitor 121.5? I think in general the answer is no. We really do rely on the D&D cell down in London to do that monitoring, but understand that they do have a very large network, national network of directional antennae. So even if you're up in Scotland, when you press the button on 1215, you will be talking to London Centre and they'll be able to hear you because they have a local antenna. And the list of their antenna locations, the current list, is in that leaflet that Chula displayed. And it does change a little bit from time to time. So Cambridge has one now, I believe, but 10 years ago they didn't. It was, I think, up at Whitton instead. Bruce Duncan mentioned it might be worth pointing out in the context of using the equipment that some radios have a dedicated single button push to get you to 121.5, particularly true of handhelds in my experience. So it's worth being familiar with your equipment. As far as aircraft radios go, mine does not, but I have 121.5 as one of my frequencies in the memory. And that's worth doing. Brahim mentions, actually coming back to the original point about who monitors D&D in France, it's a local responsibility apparently. Local towers monitor it. As I say, in the UK, it's London Centre or airliners overhead if you're too low for London Centre to hear you. Sandy Lloyd mentioned a very interesting question. How high do you need to be to raise London Centre on 1215 if you're in Scotland? And I don't know the answer. Do you have any idea, Paul or Chula?
So I think the answer is going to be, if you get a 3-line trace, 3,000 feet, that's the published answer. But
it's going to depend on the hills, I would have thought.
Yeah. It's certainly going to need to be above the mountaintops if you're up in the mountains.
It's certainly 3,000 feet around our way. You wouldn't even get Scottish information, never mind a 3-line fix. 5,000 or 6,000 feet probably.
Yeah. Indeed.
I guess above 6,000 feet you can get them, but below 6,000 feet it depends.
Yeah. Mike Horwood mentioned a good point. When you're relaying a Mayday in a marine setting, there is a standard usage, which is Mayday relay. And if you're relaying somebody else's emergency, you call Mayday relay rather than Mayday.
Yeah, we don't use that. But
yes, that's not CAP 413. So we will be teaching you to use the CAP 413 terminology, which is something like Mayday, 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 London Centre, Glider Golf, Charlie Hotel, Sierra Kilo, have intercepted Mayday from, and then give the call sign of the aircraft that's actually has the emergency. I think if you say Mayday relay, they'll know what you mean, but it's not CAP 413 usage, unlike marine settings. Richard Hanlon mentioned that increasingly 999 services can use the What 3 Words location app. So if you're on the ground and your phone has What 3 Words and you can use that, it might help. I don't know. And my experience of calling 999 and trying to give them a lat long is they have no idea what you're talking about. And I literally had to tell the operator to shut up and listen, write down what I'm going to tell you, because she was trying to ask me for postcodes. Oxford, Tego asked a very interesting question to which I don't know the answer. Oxford Airport has a frequency next to VDF on the half mil, and it's not the same as the radar frequency. I guess this just means that their VDF is usually tuned to a different frequency to their radar frequency.
Yeah.
And Andrew, I've got a few questions here.
Yep. Oh, I've got one more to finish off. Why would London Info ask you to squawk if they do not have a radar view of you? And we did cover this on Tuesday, so I can now answer this one. I couldn't have on Tuesday. They will ask you to wear a squawk so that if you blunder into somebody else's airspace, the radar unit into which you blunder can see which squawk you're wearing and say, they're talking to London Information. I'll get on the blur to London Information, and they can talk to them and tell them what they're doing wrong. Although we discovered on Tuesday that London Information do now have at least some access to a radar display, but they're not primarily a radar unit. Okay, Paul, over to you.
Okay, so Chris Marion has pointed out that if you have a discrete squawk, that is somebody who's asked you to squawk something and you make a Mayday, you would keep that squawk unless you were directed to go to 7700. If you didn't have a quick discrete squawk, then you could go to 7700. So that's an important point to remember. Okay, I've had lots of people pointing out that we've given two different numbers for D&D. And we did cover this, I think, earlier in the week. There are two numbers, apparently. The one that is published on Chula's slides, I think, is the one which they record. So we thought that was probably the better one. But the one on the leaflet is different. They answer both, we're told. Okay. Can I abbreviate my call sign from the start if I use Mayday Glider XY, or would I still have to go as Mayday Glider Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta? If you call Mayday, they're not going to care. Theoretically, you can use the proper rules, but they won't care. Okay, what else we got?
But I think what is probably worth mentioning, Paul, is from the point of view of the exam,
Yeah,
I suspect you should use the full call sign in your...
that's probably worth saying. Okay, Claudia asks, Cap 413 says, Kennington approach, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, request QDM, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Why the additional Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta at the end? To give them long enough to look at this display, Claudia. Otherwise, request QDM is the last word, at which point you stop talking and their display stops indicating. So I'm in the stuff I will be publishing in the next couple of days for the theoretical knowledge. I've put some phraseology for the VDF stuff in there. Have a look at that. What does class Bravo mean, says Richard? That's the accuracy of the bearing, which in class Bravo's case, I think is plus minus 5 degrees. Thank you. Julia's holding up 5 fingers, so I've got that right. Cat 413 and Chula say training fix, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Why is London Centre omitted? It's included in the course side. I don't know. Good question.
I think I took that from Cat 413.
Yeah. Actually, if you're transmitting on 1.2, 1.5, there's nobody else, probably nobody else you're going to be talking to. Well, no, I guess there could be. It's guard, so you could be talking to somebody else. VDF frequencies are normally the approach frequency, says Chris Marin, and examiner's care. He's an examiner, so we'll just go with that. And that I think answers the question about Oxford, because Oxford radar is the alternative frequency. So people can have a different approach frequency to their radar frequency, which I guess is why it's like that. That's me done on questions. Sure.
Great. So, Paul, so I think you're about to send us to breakout rooms, and just as you do your last look around that, and you didn't, and can I say for you, if coaches haven't put a star, then now's the time to do it urgently. My guess is the reason there are two frequencies is that there is a form of descent through cloud which uses the QDM system, and that's quite radio intensive. So they probably want that off their main radar frequencies, which is why I think they've probably got two.
Okay, so if everybody's ready, we'll go to breakout groups. I will be around for at least the next half an hour. So if you've got a problem, pop back up to me, and I'll try and sort it for you. Apart from that, I will be actually the links for next week are already on the website. I'll be sending a note out about it, and the briefing stuff will be going on in the next day or so. So have a good time in the breakouts.